Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar tonight. I just wanted to welcome you all to the Biochemical Imbalance Screening Test, Practical Tips and Clinical Applications. We're going to be discussing this online test for helping to make Walsh Research Institute based diagnoses more accurate. And I'm Dr. Chanel Hierman, and I'm the inventor of the BIST. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So here's the story of the BIST. This actually began the very first day of my very first training. So I met Dr. Walsh in October of 2014, and I was completely impressed. That's actually an understatement. I was more completely blown away by all the science and the precision and the way of approaching psychiatry with this level of accuracy. So as of that day, Dr. Walsh is my new hero. It was really a life-changing experience. So then we got to the part where we talked about the symptom traits, and there's these really nice complete lists that include all of the really important symptoms for the various diagnoses that we generally tend to screen for. And I found this really complicated, honestly. The symptoms weren't grouped by organ system or any other order that I could figure out, and it made it hard for me to follow the patient interviews or to organize my notes, and I was already confused because this is way outside my training. And I just kept wondering to myself, why did he ask that question? And so really, it was just chaos. And so my medical training and my need for order collided. And by the afternoon, I had created myself a little spreadsheet to help me organize my brain and help me be able to organize these cases and capture the data that I needed in a way that I could wrap my brain around and actually learn something from. So here's a screenshot of this. Is actually half of the original spreadsheet from my very first training. So a lot of these questions have been updated and changed since then, but this is the general gist. So I'll zoom in and show you how it really works. So this is how I originally started, is I put all the mood symptoms together. So we got the depression, and we've got the irritability, and we've got the extreme mood swings. And then I'd have the little check boxes off to the side that showed how, which of these disorders scored for this particular symptom. And then I just added them up. When a 1 point for each symptom seemed simple enough, and I was going to be able to predict what Dr. Walsh wanted us to do, which was to be able to tell him what the labs were going to show before the labs showed it. So that was my goal, was to be able to do that. So I added them all up, and it turned out it just was not that simple. So when I did add it up, it didn't match. For example, say there's a patient with 10 symptoms of pyrroles and 5 symptoms under methylation, but somehow Dr. Walsh correctly predicts that their labs are going to show that they're an undermethylator, which they were. And I was completely confused. So what was going on? It turns out this is about the power of weighting. The weight of certain symptoms makes a huge difference in the diagnosis that you finally settle on in this system. So some symptoms are very, very tightly indicative of a disorder, whether others are more loosely linked. So for example, 98% of people with autism are undermethylated, whereas only 38% of people with depression are undermethylated. And then there are other little traits where maybe the symptoms are only 10 or 20%, but they're still significant. So how do we account for these differences and make sure that in our minds, when we're diagnosing a patient, we are mentally weighing those different amounts? So I needed to learn this system because I knew it could help patients. I was, like I said, so inspired by Dr. Walsh's work that I originally created this tool as a study guide for myself. I needed a way to be able to learn the system in real life in a conventional psychiatry clinic, which is where I was working at the time, and while working with regular non-integrative patients. So I needed a better sense of which symptoms really mattered, which ones I could disregard, which were just sort of informational. And I needed a lot more diagnostic accuracy than I was getting. I was honestly, at that first training, it was chance at best whether I got the diagnosis correctly for what Dr. Walsh was predicting. And I needed a tool, and I needed it right then because I had to work within my current system. I did and still do work largely within a low-income Medicaid population. I work in a community mental health center, and I don't have any extra time per patient beyond what's needed to practice conventional psychiatry well. In fact, sometimes on certain days that can be a challenge with as busy as those clinics can be. There's no extra time to review all of the relevant symptoms, to do a proper Walsh evaluation in the course of this clinic, but I knew those patients could really use the help. And so I needed a way to be able to collect most of the Walsh-related data outside of my visit time. And that would allow me to follow up in more detail on particular questions as needed, but not be going through one at a time the over 100 questions that I eventually got this down to for screening for these disorders. So this is with many thanks to the experts, especially to my hero, Dr. Walsh, for his patience with my endless questions. I literally spent the next 2 years after my first training following Dr. Walsh around like a shadow at every training I could attend, sending emails, making phone calls. And this is put out there with great appreciation for his graciously offering his time to consult with me one-on-one on this project. And thanks especially to my partner in this project, Dr. Ronald Glick of the University of Pittsburgh, who shared his expertise on psychrometrics and test development, and then assisted in phrasing and the arrangement of our questions so that we'd get accurate data. And thanks also to Drs. Mensah and Bowman, who shared their own clinical perspective as physicians and how these symptoms present in the clinic. So what I really wanted, and I've been saying this to people for 2 years now, is I want to create the Walsh DSM. Now the DSM has its own struggles, but no one can really argue that when this was developed, it added a level of specificity and validity to psychiatric diagnosis that hadn't really existed before it came along. So my mission is to bring a level of diagnostic specificity to the Walsh diagnostic system that matches or surpasses that of conventional psychiatry. And I want to bring Dr. Walsh's work to the world. Now, Dr. Walsh is a genius, but all of us aren't. We need a way to systematize his intuition and clinical judgment that is so apparent when he does the trainings in a way that anyone can recreate his success. And for that, we need a tool so that anyone, anywhere, can make these diagnoses accurately and confidently in their communities and clinics. And does it work? This is the big question. And finally, after 2 years of tweaking, yes, it does. I feel really confident in saying that. After numerous adjustments, the test accurately predicted the lab results for all of the patients at the training I went to most recently, and I'm really pleased with how well it's turned out. I've been using this tool myself during the course of its development with really great results. There's actually some formal research in progress, and we're in the process of creating a larger scale quality improvement study to verify the accuracy of these predictions. And if you're interested in participating in our research project, definitely contact me. We'd love to hear from you. So the way I'm looking at this is that this is functional and integrative psychiatry 2.0. This is our next step in our development. It's 2017. We can do better. We can do better than just vague feelings. We can do better than general impressions. We can do better than our gut reactions for our clinical intuition. And it's not that our clinical intuition is bad. It's a wonderful thing to inform what we're doing, but it can't be the only thing we're doing if we're practicing science-based medicine. What we're trying to do is thoughtfully utilize the best of the current technology to give ideal care to our patients. So my goals in creating the BIST are to build on what works. This is the #1 most important thing. We want to preserve the personal, the high-touch aspects of the integrative and functional psychiatry approach. To be really clear, this test does not replace the clinical interview. This isn't an either or. This isn't a, well, I'm someone who likes to actually talk to my patients. No, the idea is not to just send your patients to some website, get some numbers back and go do magic. No, this is an informational tool. This is like ordering a lab test. It helps you to inform your treatment. It doesn't replace your interview, but it does make your interview more accurate, which is really important. And then we also want to improve the standardization of this approach, so improving the accuracy of Walsh-based diagnoses, and that'll correct for the unreliability that plagues functional laboratory tests, and that can be due to errors when it's being drawn at local labs or processing inconsistencies at times. And it also protects against lab or patient errors. So sometimes what if the patient forgot to go off their supplements before they got their labs drawn, or the lab didn't know exactly which tube to put it in. This helps us to rely on objective measures rather than just subjective clinical impressions. So basically, this is the importance of knowing the pretest probability, which, as we all know from medical school, is absolutely critically important. So if you know, for example, that this patient, when you interview them, seemed like they probably had traits of undermethylation, and their BIST test comes back, wow, they're off the scale on undermethylation, and then their labs come back, and it says overmethylation. Before the BIST, you might be tempted to pitch your interview impressions and, well, the lab's the objective measure. Obviously, this is the thing. And this gives you one more tool to go, no, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. This doesn't fit the patient I'm seeing in front of me. And then you can call the lab and have it redrawn or rerun and get better accuracy that way. We also want to improve the efficiency of the Walsh-based treatment system because this will allow us to bring the Walsh system to a wide range of clinical settings within the limits of our current insurance-based system, because not everyone has access to a membership-based, a concierge-based, a cash-based model. There are a lot of people who need to work within our current system, and how are we going to get this out there to them? I especially think it's important to bring this work to underserved populations because they stand most to benefit. A lot of my experience in my low-income clinics is that a lot of these folks are in this disadvantaged and lower socioeconomic situation in large part because of the severity of symptoms that they've had throughout their lives. And if we can help these people to get well and stay well using the Walsh approach, I want to bring this to as many of these people as we can. So how does it work? The nuts and bolts. Basically, once you sign up, each practice gets their own customized website link, and then you just send your patients there. You can send it to them in an email or post it on your website, whatever's easiest for you. And then it automatically redirects your patients back to your website after they complete their test. So they just go online, take the test, takes only about 15 or 20 minutes, and it's really easy for them. It's really easy for you. It's a super simple program. So how it works with the scoring and results, once the patients have completed their test, the results are automatically scored by the computerized system using the special weighted scoring system that takes into account the importance of the various symptoms and automatically prioritizes them for you for the 6 most common biochemical imbalances. Then it creates a different score for each imbalance, plus a validity measure to make sure your patient completed the test accurately. So the results are immediately emailed directly to you, and they come with a simple 3-step guide to score interpretation that we'll be going over here in a moment. And it also includes a full PDF transcript of every question that was answered by your patient and how they answered it. So this is great to review with your patient during your initial clinical interview or your follow-up interviews, and it actually helps you get to know them. It's kind of a fun little tool that way. And the report is easy to include in your medical record. So you can attach the PDF to an EMR, you can print it out, it's whatever works for the system that you've got. So the technical side of it, there's actually no special technical expertise needed from either you or your patient. It's just a simple web-based survey format, kind of like SurveyMonkey, and you can complete it from any browser or device, including mobile devices like phones and iPads. Regarding security, which is always one of the big issues, the test actually only identifies patients by initials and gender. So no protected health information is collected or sent over the internet, which means there's no HIPAA-related hassle, there's no BAA needed, and it ensures the tightest security because no sensitive information is making it out over the internet to begin with. So the key points that I wanted to talk about here in our demonstration, the first one is credibility. And it may seem kind of, is something we don't think about a lot, but using technology with our patients improves our credibility. There was a study from the Institute for Functional Medicine not too long ago that talked about how much more early adopters of technology make in their practices because patients find it attractive to work with people who seem like they're on the cutting edge of technology. This is especially true for the kind of outside-the-box thinkers that are attracted to the integrated functional medicine approaches. For example, I had a recent study that I actually completed on the use of technology for group psychotherapy, and it was highly praised by the patients, specifically the technology. One of the comments that we got was, I felt we're part of today's technology. I believe technology is our future. We should embrace it and utilize it when we can. It makes me seem important to be a part of this. So patients actually take it as a personal compliment that you've chosen to use these high-tech tools to help figure out what's wrong with them and how you can help them to feel better. It is also good for efficiency. This test, one of my main goals was to avoid redundant questions. I don't know if you've seen this on the standard paper questionnaires used by a lot of Walsh-based practitioners, is it often includes the exact same question multiple times. This is either the same question or it's inverse because they're related to multiple imbalances, but this system's awkward, it's time-consuming for patients, and having those all simplified out is much more elegant and professional looking. So for example, here's just a couple of questions taken out of the learning habits and achievement section. So your motivation during your school years, are they self-motivated? Are they low motivation or kind of average? concentration, poor concentration consistently, difficulty focusing for long periods, or no real problems with concentration. You can screen for underachievement academically, overachievement, or if they were generally consistent with their abilities. And in a previous paper version of this test, each of these would be an individual question, sometimes multiple times throughout the test. And from the patient perspective, that just doesn't look as professional and polished as we want to. Not to mention that it wastes their time. It also helps us with focus because it avoids irrelevant question. So the test actually screens out appropriate questions based on their gender, actually rather their biological sex, and it screens out unnecessary questions. So the psychosis detail questions aren't even asked in patients with no psychosis history. So I'll show you, this is on the welcome page, here's what's your biological sex, and if you answer male, you will not get all these questions about your menstrual periods, your endometriosis, your pregnancy history. You won't get your response to birth control pills. Likewise, screening, if the patients say that they have never experienced psychotic symptoms and they do not carry a psychotic diagnosis, skips directly to the next part of the test and they can get on to the parts that actually apply to them. Also, patient engagement and compliance. This is huge. So the way this test is set up is at the end, when the patient is done taking their test, they get a little report that shows them how they scored. And because of that preview of, wow, you've got something that might be really wrong here, that increases the likelihood that they're going to show up to their visits with you and engage in the treatment process. However, as a safety measure, this report does not include the nature of the imbalance. We've left that out. The different diagnoses are just labeled by group 1, group 2, group 3, and it's up to you as the doctor to interpret that for them because that's right there on your printed score report, but not on the one the patient receives. And that prevents self-treatment. What I found is more than once I've seen someone who ordered themselves some labs for their methylation status or other issues and then proceeded to treat themselves based on a protocol they found online, usually with less than optimal results at best. So this prevents that from happening, at least as a result of this test. So here's an example of what it might look like for a patient. So for group 3, their average score, this person has a high probability of having a significant imbalance. You can see their little red light here. Group 4, the average score, they have a low probability. There's a nice little green light here. Don't have to worry about that there. And group 5 average score is right here in the yellow zone, so that there's a moderate probability. And if you'll notice here under group 4, it says that if the above average score is high, it may be not valid due to a high number of questions left unanswered. So that's something we're going to talk about here in a minute, is our validity score, which is a really important feature of this test. So an example score report comes to your email inbox looking like this. New response notification from Survey Gizmo, who's the company who's hosting this test for me. And the Biochemical Imbalance Screening Test PDF is attached to that email. It says, thank you for using the BIST, and please find your results attached. And the score interpretation, which we'll be going through here momentarily, is right there. So it looks like this. Here's their score for which stands for undermethylation. You've got their average score. This is the score that they did. And then here's the ranges so that you know where this person falls. So for example, this one is low. The total score is a 0. And this is our validity measure, which we'll talk about here in a moment. So their total score was actually quite low. Overmethylation, same kind of thing, low, moderate, and high probability, as well as the total score validity measure. Copper imbalance, copper overload, pyroluria, zinc deficiency, and heavy metals. So the 3 simple steps to BIST score interpretation. Step 1, the first step in receiving a new score is to download the attached PDF. This is going to be attached to the email that you get, and this contains a full transcript of every question your patient answered, and that's suitable for inclusion in your electronic medical record or your paper record system if that's what you're using, and you can review that at that time. Step 2, and this is assuming that you or one of your staff didn't complete the test with your patient. The second and most important step is to check the validity. Now, some people do actually find that it's useful to have staff help patients fill out the test. I've done it myself in session if I have extra time, and that works reasonably well as well. But if you don't have the time, this is a way to check and make sure your patient really put in the effort, make sure they actually answered all the questions like the instructions tell you to do. This is the safety measure to make sure that our results are really accurate. So the validity check is the total score, and the reference range is listed with each result. And if the score is below the reference range, the high average result is considered invalid. So let me show you how this works. So basically, the reference range is set at 40% of the total possible score, and that's just to make it match up with the average score cutoff, which we'll be talking about in a moment. Because of the nature of our online scoring, Unfortunately, it's possible to really skew the results if the patient only answers a couple of questions, but those are really highly weighted questions. So you get an 8-point or a 10-point question, and those are the only two you answer, and then you don't answer anything else for that disorder. It's possible for it to look like you're quite ill when perhaps you're not. So that's important so that we don't get false positives. Now, this does not impact low scores. So if the score is low, it's probably not all that useful information, but it isn't something you should necessarily disregard. If everything was, well, it's probably accurate, because most people just skip questions, so it doesn't really apply to them, and so it's almost like answering no. Unfortunately, our computer can't figure that out. So patients should be strongly encouraged when you give them this test, as stated in the instructions, to answer every single question, whether they think it applies to them or not. If it does not apply to them, click no. And that'll help the scoring system to work more accurately. You can also get a rough impression of how much effort your patient put forward just by checking the PDF that you received. So here's an example score report. So let's say here's a ZIG score. Average score is a 3.63, which, as you can see, falls squarely in the moderate disorder range. However, our total score is only a 50. And if our total is less than 53, the average score results are not valid. So this one should just be ignored. It's not useful information. However, here's a PIRO result. It's 1.05, and it was low. And the total score is also below the 116 cutoff, but because it's low, we're considering this a valid result, and they probably do not have symptoms of pyroluria based on this. So finally, step 3, this is the exciting part of the BIST score interpretation, and the final step is to check for the scoring of each associated imbalance. So the primary score for each imbalance is the average score, which is listed just under the abbreviation in your score report. And the score reference range for either low, moderate, and high probability of imbalance is listed with each result. And it looks sort of like this, but I'll get to this in just a second. One thing to keep a note of, though, is that each imbalance has a different number of questions, just because that's how it worked out. Some disorders have more symptoms that Dr. Walsh screens for than others, and therefore the numbers are different for each one, but the percentages are the same. So the weighting is the same. It's just a matter of that a 7 may be a high score for one and a low score for another. And so you have to read through the reference ranges for each one when you get your results. The reference ranges are based on Dr. Walsh's principle that endorsing 40% or more of the clinical symptoms of an imbalance is clinically significant. So the bottom end of the moderate range is the 40% cutoff, and then the top end we set at 60% in order to better approximate a bell curve. So patients whose scores exceed 60% are at the tail end of the bell curve, and therefore clinicians should maintain a very high index of suspicion for that imbalance. So these are the ones that, if their laboratory values come back not quite what you're expecting, have those rerun, maybe have them go get drawn somewhere else because something is not right. So here's an example score report. So here's a copper overload. The average score is 5.36, which falls squarely in the high probability of imbalance range. And the total score is 118, which is well over the cutoff of 73, so this is a valid score. So for this person, you would want to consider treatment after correlation with the laboratory values and your interview. So BIST score interpretation, special notes on heavy metals. The heavy metal score must be correlated with the clinical history unless there is a clear source of heavy metal exposure in the clinical history. This scale should be entirely disregarded. Okay, the decline in academics, by the way, with such exposures only applies to childhood exposures, not to adults. So that's one of the questions on your PDF that you're going to want to pay special attention to. And also note that the sudden onset of symptoms is typical for most heavy metal exposures, but lead toxicity can come on very gradually. So keep an eye on those questions as well. So for example, here's an average heavy metal score report. The average is high. It's a 5.0. The total score is above the cutoff. However, they have no heavy metal exposure history, so you will completely disregard this portion of your score report. And finally, but most importantly, special notes on clinical correlation. Always correlate the test results with your own interview and laboratory testing. As is noted on the disclaimer page of each test at the very front, this test is a screening tool only. This should not be used as the basis for diagnosis or treatment without obtaining the appropriate laboratory tests and correlating the information provided by the test with your own clinical interview and the laboratory results. So this all leads to the most important results of all, which is happy patients and happy doctors. So the nuts and bolts of how to get your own BIST. Well, if you'd like to try it out for yourself and just kind of play with it, you can go to test.drchanel.com And then you can learn more and check out the trial version. We have kind of a blank test that you can play around with and see what it looks like in real life. If you're ready to roll and you want to sign up, you can go directly to synergeniustelepresence.com/test-signup.html, or if you go to the previous link at test.drchanel.com, the link to subscribe is at the bottom of the page. And I'm also going to put these links in the video comments. There are 2 plans. Monthly is $29.99 per month plus $25 to set up your personalized test, or yearly for $300 per year, and that includes free setup of your test. We're also offering a special webinar discount, which is 25% off either option with the coupon code BIST webinar. That's BIST WEBINAR, and that is available through May 31st. And feel free to share that with your colleagues who weren't able to make it to the webinar. You can also join our research program. There's actually a research discount that's going to be available soon. So do contact me if you're willing to share your patient data for our upcoming study. So thank you very much for watching this video and for coming to the webinar. And I'm so glad that you were interested and would like to know more about the BIST. I'm very proud of it, and I would love to answer more questions that you might have about how this works. Go to Dr. Chanel at drchanel.com. That's DOCTORCHANEL at drchanel.com. And I'm easy to get a hold of over email. And I will look forward to hearing from you, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks.